All right. Are you ready?
Sure.
All right. So, everyone, we are live with Lisa Savage. Is that how I pronounce it?
That's right.
All right. That's going to be fantastic for all kinds of memes. Um, Lisa is running for the Green Party of Maine for the Senate against the incumbent is Susan Collins. Most of you probably already know her. Uh, Democratic challenger Sarah Gideon, and I believe an independent Max Lynn. Uh, so first question here, of course, you're challenging Susan Collins for her seat, and you're running as a third party candidate for the Green Party. First, what's wrong with Susan Collins? And a lot of people that you know are progressive, there's a saying, vote blue no matter who. Why is Sarah Gideon not good enough?
Thanks for the question and thanks for having me. I'm just going to back up a minute. I am an independent Green. I am not running as a third party candidate because I could not get ballot access as a Green. I tried that first. I was a Green when this all started. The rules in Maine are very onerous about what you have to do to get on as a third party. And the Secretary of State actually admitted in the press that it was nearly impossible to do. So we had to pivot. I unenrolled. I got on as an independent easily. So now I call myself an independent Green. I didn't change my platform or my values, and the Green Party, both here in Maine and nationally, has continued to support my campaign. As far as what's wrong with the incumbent, well, she's the most unpopular senator in the country right now for a variety of reasons, but most people would put her elevation of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court as being the first time that they realized what a dangerous senator she was. She used to be viewed as a moderate and a centrist, and there was some evidence for that, especially around women's reproductive rights and children's health and education issues. But as soon as the current occupant of the White House came in, she changed her tune and basically has supported every single bad thing that this administration has done. And she has been on the outs with the postal workers since back in '06 when she co-authored legislation to undercut their financial stability of the U.S. Postal Service. She was the author of that bill that they had to fund their pensions, the health care for their pensioners out 75 years, which no other corporation or government entity has to do. And that created the predictable fiscal insolvency that we're seeing now. She lost me, not that I ever would have voted for her, but I know a lot of people who have. She lost me when she introduced Jeff Sessions glowingly to her Senate committee as for a fantastic candidate for Attorney General of the United States. Jeff Sessions is a blatant white supremacist, made no attempt to conceal it at any point in his career. And for her to introduce him as a worthy candidate for Attorney General is just beyond the pale to me. Since Kavanaugh, she supported the bad tax bill in 2017 that robbed from the poor and gave to the already wealthy. And when the president was impeached and the Senate had a chance to convict, she took a pass on that one too, saying that she thought he had learned his lesson. So she's on all the comedy shows all the time where they're making fun of her going, oh, I'm concerned, or, oh, I'm, troubled, or whatever. She talks the talk, but she doesn't walk the walk. And so that's why she's super unpopular right now. Sarah Gideon is as the Speaker of the Maine House. So she's a representative in Maine in the state legislature. And she certainly would be a better senator for us than Susan Collins, because she would not enable the Trump administration if there is, God forbid, a second one. However, she's a corporate centrist. She doesn't support Medicare for all. She takes huge contributions from Big Pharma, but says she doesn't. All of her corporate donations get laundered through leadership PACs, so she can claim her opponent takes corporate money, but she doesn't. And she is not in favor of a Green New Deal. Her approach to climate crisis is to say, well, let's get carbon neutral by 2050, and let's build more roads, and let's protect the shorefront houses, the beach houses, one of which she lives in. I'm the only non-millionaire in the race. Max Lynn, who you mentioned, is a retired financial advisor from Bar Harbor, and he also is a millionaire. But Max Lynn and I are running as independents.
All right, so we do have an international audience, but obviously, this being a Maine race, I want to prioritize questions from Maine constituents. First question we have from a Maine constituent is from Angela. She wants to know, what are your thoughts on a national child care system?
I would love nothing more than to institute a national child care system. I've been watching working parents struggle through the pandemic. It's really hit them very, very hard because, you know, public education functions as free public daycare for a certain age child, certain hours of the day. And when parents lost that suddenly and they still had to do their jobs from home, very challenging. But even so, the US has been behind other wealthy countries for decades in this regard. I favor fully funding childcare from infancy through really graduate school at the public higher education level. Um, Wealthy countries do that not because they want to be nice to their citizens or they think their citizens are deserving. They do it because it's good for society. It helps everyone when there's publicly subsidized daycare that's licensed and vetted, and it's available even when, you know, the child is sick, and it's close by where the parents work so that they can uh, come there if they need to in the middle of the day. And, you know, other countries have had this for years, and workers that have that report very high, like job satisfaction and high productivity. It's very hard to juggle caring for children and, you know, doing your job. So I would love to see the US get in step with the rest of the world that way.
And Angela also wants to know, how can you make a system like that sustainable?
You mean how to fund it? I'm guessing sustainable means fund it. This is the wealthiest country in the history of the world. And we spend, on paper, 55% of the budget every year, the discretionary budget that Congress can allocate, goes to the Pentagon. It's mostly corporate welfare for super wealthy weapons manufacturers who aren't subject to audits, waste just, you know, an enormous amount of money. Last year, both Democrats and Republicans voted for a $750 billion Pentagon budget. And that is an artificially low figure because all the nuclear weapons are hidden in the Energy Department budget. And the VA is its own budget line. I believe the VA got 6.5% the last time I crunched the federal budget numbers. I don't want to underfund the VA. I think the VA should be fully funded. But if you add that with the Black Ops CIA military stuff that's like too secret for us to know about, it adds up to about 70% of our federal budget year after year after year. The scale of how much universal child care would cost versus how much it costs to build a destroyer, a warship, you know, you could fund universal child care for years for everyone who needs it because the you know cost of those things are way out of scale. There's a website called National Priorities Project .org that I've used a lot that allows you to see what those trade-offs are, to say, okay, if I took Maine's contribution to the defense budget this year and I turned that into scholarships for public university students, how many, you know, scholarships would that fund? It's a pretty interesting website and very well done, and they're just using federal budget data. So I think we have plenty of money in this country to take care of people's real needs, but we have very poor budget priorities.
All right, next question from Mainers. Both Brenton and Amber are asking, what are your thoughts on the corridor? And for users here who aren't familiar from out of state, could you describe what the idea is?
Sure. The CMP corridor, or it's misleadingly named the New England Clean Energy Connect, is a proposal to cut about a 57-mile swath through the Maine woods, the northern Maine woods, where the Canadian border, and on down to Lewiston in western Maine, to conduct electricity build a high transmission line that would take power generated by mega dams that are owned by Hydro-Quebec in Canada and sell that electricity to Massachusetts. So it would pass through Maine on its way, and the connector between Hydro-Quebec and the existing lines that start in Lewiston and run to Massachusetts is the proposal. This is a proposal that Central Maine Power, which is owned by Iberdrola, a big, it's a multinational energy company, but it's based in Spain. They own Central Maine Power. They stand to make hundreds of millions of dollars off the deal. Hydro-Quebec stands to make hundreds of millions of dollars off the deal. And Goldman Sachs stands to make at least tens of millions off the deal by issuing the bonds that would fund it. The clean part, and the reason I'm using air quotes, is we're often told that hydropower is clean. So this is the rationale that's been offered for why cutting down a bunch of forest when we're already in a climate crisis and should be planting trees that sequester carbon. The argument is, oh, well, because hydropower is clean. Well, not the way Hydro-Quebec makes it. I have now twice heard an MIT professor named Brad Hager, who studies the greenhouse gas emissions generated by different kinds of electricity production. And he found that the mega dams that are in use in Canada have the highest greenhouse gas emissions footprint by far, because they flood, when they create the reservoir that's behind the dam that's going to generate the power through the turbines, they flood an area like the size of the state of Vermont, and it drowns all the vegetation in that area. And that produces a whole lot of methane, which is a much more destructive greenhouse gas for climate than even carbon is, CO2. So it's not clean. It's not good for Maine. Maine stands to make, a handful of jobs temporarily off the deal. And Massachusetts, my friends in Massachusetts tell me they were sold the deal on the lie that it was clean energy and that the greenhouse gas footprint was really low. And they voted for it because Massachusetts as a state has a very ambitious climate plan to get to carbon neutral by, I think it's 2030. So I'm against it because everyone in Maine is against it, unless you stand to make money off it. This is the issue that cuts across all political parties, socioeconomic status, gender, race. Everyone in Maine is against the CMP corridor, except for some politicians who are part of the money structure. But one of the things I learned from a tour that my husband and I attended last winter here in Maine was that the indigenous people's way of life that are in areas in Canada that have these mega dams are destroyed. Imagine flooding an area the size of Vermont with 14 inches of water that goes up and down on the whim of the power company when they want to make money. So it ruins their fishing, their hunting. It smells terrible. They said it smells like, a swampy place that's some very shallow standing water. And the other thing is it's very dangerous when it freezes. They keep lowering and raising the water level. And so the ice has these pockets of air between them that you can't see, and people fall through it on their snowmobiles. So Cree-speaking people, Inuit, and other First Nations people of Canada are very much opposed to the project also.
One more question we've got from a Maine voter. Shauna wants to know if you've heard the term the Great Reset. And if you have any thoughts on it. It's the idea about how we restructure society after COVID.
I'm not very familiar with the Great Reset. It does seem that COVID has given us some opportunities. Certainly air pollution went down dramatically right away. That was largely due to air travel being cut so much. But one of the things I always, before I became a US Senate candidate, I organized for years around climate and militarism, the harm that the Pentagon does to climate. And during the pandemic, the military was still considered essential. If you were building weapon systems, that was essential. And all those military jets and bombings just went right on. Only imagine how much better the climate would be if the military had also said, oh, it's the pandemic, let's stop flying. But I don't know enough about the Great Reset to speak about it.
All right. Next question we have here is from Lil Bill, one of our Canadian members. He wants to know, is there any copyright or patent reform that you support?
copyright or patent reform? Another thing I don't know a great deal about.
All right. He's also got another question. If you support a universal basic income.
I do. I support a guaranteed minimum income, which I think would be more likely to be supported by Mainers. The universal basic income, I understand that it's worked very well in places that have tried it, and it does achieve many of the promised equity issues, and it's good for the economy and so on. Maine is a chronically depressed economy. It was depressed the day I was born here, and it still is. And I think it would be a hard sell for Mainers to think that we're going to send, let's pick a figure, $1,000 a month, even to millionaires, even to very wealthy people would also get that $1,000. Now, I understand the rationale behind, so there's no stigma involved, and so forth. I also find wealthy people tend to hoard money. I think that I think being, super uber wealthy is a hoarding disorder. So I'm not sure that they would put the $1,000 right back into the economy like working people would. Working class people need to spend the money to live. But I do believe that we should have a guaranteed minimum income. It could probably be achieved through negative income tax or some structure like that, sort of like the earned income credit, where you qualify for actually getting a subsidy rather than having to pay income tax. And I do think that there should be no stigma attached to it. Again, most of the wealthy countries have some form of this. It's better for society, certainly better for children. I was a school teacher for 25 years, just retired, always thinking about how it would affect children. And I think that a guaranteed basic income would affect children in Maine in a very positive way.
All right. Next question we have here is from a user named McDoug. As I understand from his question, I know the figures for unemployment are a little bit weird during COVID, but Maine has a higher unemployment than most states. He wants to know, how will you return jobs to Mainers, especially those who have become unemployed as a result of the pandemic?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think it's a great one. Well, Medicare for All is my #1 platform I'm running on, but secondary to that is my second biggest priority is a demilitarized Green New Deal. The New Deal refers to the fact that it's a great jobs program, and it's a jobs program patterned after the New Deal of the Great Depression in the 30s, when the federal government used federal funding to create jobs to address infrastructure needs in our country. And it was very successful in doing that. Now, I call it a demilitarized Green New Deal because of what I referenced before. Building warships is the biggest single employer here in Maine. And whenever we're told that we can't stop doing that, even though it is bad for climate and we don't actually need more warships, we're always told, but we need the jobs. So Bath Iron Works, which is owned by General Dynamics, a very wealthy multinational weapons manufacturer, Bath Iron Works employs about 6,000 people typically in good union jobs with benefits. But economist research shows that if we stopped building warships and instead built clean energy systems or some form of public transportation, like a light rail passenger system that Maine lacks, it would generate 50% additional jobs. So building for the Pentagon contracting isn't actually a very good jobs program, just in terms of the number of jobs it generates. If you build a model and you say, I'm going to put $1 billion into this sector of the economy or that sector, how many jobs does that typically generate based on data from past performance? Building weapon systems is like bad. It's a bad one. It's very capital intensive. There are a lot of robotics involved, and it doesn't generate as many jobs as the same dollar investment in education, healthcare, building clean energy systems would. So I am focused on the demilitarized part because, again, when people go, but how are you going to pay for this? I say, you've got 70% of your budget going to militarism right now. That's where I'd look first. And I think that people in Maine would love to have jobs. We've worked with the workers at BIW for years, and many of them they were organized before, or we got this Tea Party governor, Paul LePage, who canceled the program. But the workers were actually organizing to build these platforms for offshore wind. You know, it's kind of like a ship. It has to function, you know, way out in the deep ocean. And but the governor, the Republican governor, Paula Page, came in and killed that program. I think most people in Maine just want a good job, a union job with benefits and union protections, and they would be happy to be building trains instead of warships if we could institute that kind of a Green New Deal. The New Deal that Democrats favor is a very watered down version of the Green New Deal. The Green Party developed the Green New Deal back when, I think when Howie Hawkins ran for governor of New York. It was even before Jill Stein's first presidential run. But it also includes investments in regenerative agriculture. So food production practices that are sustainable and that are good for the environment and not harmful to it. And, you know, we've had a drought all summer in Maine due to climate change, and it's hurt the farmers quite a bit. You know, it's hard to grow crops like potatoes and apples and blueberries if it doesn't rain all growing season. And then the third part of a demilitarized Green New Deal would be consumer-owned and operated utilities, such as electricity. I don't think Maine's electricity generating and transmission system should be owned by a multinational that's headquartered in Spain. Maine consumers would do a much better job of making decisions that would be beneficial to the users. And I think water also should be a public utility. And I also believe that broadband internet should be a public utility, consumer owned and operated. I'm in Bath, Maine right now, staying with friends. I live in Solon, which is kind of in the foothills of the Western Mountains up in the 2nd District. There isn't enough internet connectivity for me to do this Zoom call with you from where I live. And that is true of many places in rural Maine. And when the pandemic hit and children went to remote learning, a lot of children in Maine did not have access to do remote learning. And some of them, it was because their parents couldn't afford it. And so school districts and the Department of Education addressed that. But many people, I have the best internet where I live that you can get, but it isn't really good enough to do video conferencing.
Next question we have from one of our users here, as I understand what they were saying, the House Democrats put forward a bill, I guess they passed it, for a $1.5 million infrastructure project, and Trump was trying to get that reduced to a $1 trillion project. As an independent Green, how do you feel about a major infrastructure bill like that?
It depends on what we're talking about when we talk about infrastructure. It's been my experience that the corporate parties tend to want to build more roads or put in gas pipelines, natural gas. You know, I'm using the air quotes there because it's fracked gas, and I don't consider that natural. So there are infrastructure projects and there are infrastructure projects. One of the things that's my husband always advocates for at Bath Iron Works, because we've been working on a conversion campaign there with many people in Maine for years. He always says, you know, the bridges in Maine are in terrible shape. They get like a D from the engineers, you know, overall. And why couldn't we be building components to replace all the bridges in Maine? You know, that would be a good infrastructure project. So I guess, you know, if we're going to build more roads, that is not going to help climate. If we're going to build more airports, that is not going to help climate. But if we're talking about trains and we're talking about fixing the bridges we have, then I'm all for infrastructure projects.
All right, next question we have here comes from Ferret with a Hat. They want to know, seeing as you were a teacher, what is your opinion on America's current education system?
Well, Ferret with a Hat, I wish I could see you because that sounds like a really fun image. Let's see, where to start? Well, I think public education has been underfunded since the day I was born. And I think that it has been increasingly dependent on your zip code, whether you receive a quality education in the public schools or not. And that is inherently undemocratic. It's been achieved largely through non-governmental structures like redlining, not letting families of color buy houses in certain neighborhoods. And that was, you know, real estate agents and banks basically putting that in place. But the underlying structural problem is that the US funds public education largely through local property taxes. Most wealthy countries do not fund public education that way because, again, it leads to a situation where someone who lives in the town I live in Maine is going to receive much less spending on their education per capita than someone who lives down in southern Maine in one of the wealthier towns. I do feel that the research clearly supports that when you invest in education, the whole society benefits. That pre-K education is particularly powerful investment when 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds are given the opportunity to spend the day with their peers in a good program that's developmentally appropriate and receiving adequate nutrition, which many children in Maine do not receive except at school. And then on the other end, I think that public higher education should be funded through grad school. Again, other wealthy countries do this, not because they want to give a kid a break, but because they're like, we need engineers, we need doctors, we need teachers. If we have students that are capable and they want to get that kind of training, let's pay for them to get it. I do feel that if someone wants to go to Harvard, they could probably figure out on their own how to pay for that. But right now in Maine, we have students coming. We have a pretty good community college system. It's extensive. It does a lot of good vocational training programs and gets people an associate's degree without an enormous investment of money. But even the associate's degrees, some students are coming out with tens of thousands of dollars of debt from a community college, and then they transfer to a 4-year, University of Maine campus, and they end up with, some of them, hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. I don't see why going to, your state university or your state's community colleges should result in debt that is so onerous. It takes decades to pay it off, if in fact you can. Most people with that kind of debt in Maine leave the state because the jobs aren't here to support paying back that kind of debt. And the ones that do stay are ending up with 2 or 3 jobs to, pay their rent and keep food in the cupboards and make their debt payments. And then, when I used to say, and then when they were teenagers, they signed on to a debt agreement that carries over way into their adult life. It's depressing our economy. They can't build a house. They can't start a business, do the things that my generation was doing at that age. And the law was written such that if they declare bankruptcy, they still can't get out from under their student loans. And I used to go, who wrote that law? Until I was on the Jimmy Dore show and he said, Joe Biden. Joe Biden wrote that law. And I'm afraid Jimmy is right. That's exactly who wrote those laws. So I think, again, public money should be invested in public education for the public good.
All right, next question we have here. Amy Coney Barrett was just confirmed for the U.S. Senate 52 to 48. What are your thoughts in general on the Supreme Court, and would you favor plans like expanding the number of seats on the Supreme Court?
Yes, I do favor reforming the Supreme Court, including expanding the number of seats, including doing away with the lifetime appointment. The average life expectancy of an American was 39 years old when that rule was made. It's now 79 years old. So I favor an 18-year term limit on Supreme Court justices. And even aside from whether I think Amy Coney Barrett was qualified to be a Supreme Court justice, she clearly was not, the process of rushing her confirmation through literally during an election because of COVID, we started voting in Maine like a month ago. And people have been voting all over the country for a while here. When there was a vacancy on the Supreme Court during the Obama administration and he nominated Merrick Garland, the same Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, left that seat empty for 10 months. So it didn't seem to be a big emergency then, but now all of a sudden, this time it was an emergency. So, turning the Supreme Court into a political football is a bad idea. The Supreme Court was supposed to be above partisan politics and able to serve as a sort of brake on the excesses of either the executive branch of government, running with the bit in their mouth and using their imperial power to do this and that, and also legislation that was unconstitutional. But it's become so politicized at this point. I know that the Supreme Court has lost the respect that the American people once had for it. It's really been really sad to see that particular institution of government just kind of cheapened and I'm sorry that's happened. I do believe that if we perhaps expanded the court quite a bit, and then, if you had a large number of justices that were qualified to hear cases, and then you impaneled 9 at a time to hear any given case, and you had term limits, I believe that would go a long way towards solving some of the problems that we're looking at.
All right, our next question here comes from Dev, one of our Danish users who was mostly raised in the US. He wants to know, considering that you are a third-party candidate, often considered in the US as a wasted effort or a wasted vote, why are you running? What has motivated you not just to run, but to believe in the American experiment with the vigor that you do here today?
I can answer that question in 3 words: ranked choice voting. So Maine has a system of voting now where there is no spoiler effect. And as I explained earlier, I'm not technically a third-party candidate now, I'm an independent, but it would work the same way. When we got our ballots, we saw there are 4 candidates in this race, and it looked like a standardized test. There are little bubbles next to their name, and you pick the one you want most, you bubble in for first. The one that you that you maybe are voting for as a safety vote, they're not your favorite candidate, but you really don't want the bad one to win, so you bubble them in second, and then third, fourth. You don't have to bubble anything after first if you don't want to, but under ranked choice voting, the way it works here in Maine is in the first round of vote counting, if anyone gets a majority, so that's 50% plus 1 vote, then they win, and the election doesn't go to the other rounds. Sometimes ranked choice voting is called instant runoff voting, and I think in many ways it's a better name because it describes more how it works. If no one gets that majority, which is very likely in my race, neither the incumbent nor the Democratic challenger have polled anywhere near 50% during the campaign season. And then all the ballots are sent to the Secretary of State, and a count is done of they look at who got the fewest votes in the first round, and that person is now eliminated. They cross that name off, and they say, people that picked that candidate first, ranked them first, who did they rank second? And those second rankings are transferred to the other candidates. Now, does anybody have a majority? If so, election over. If not, they go to the next round, cross off the next name until there's a majority winner. So my presence in the race gives people the opportunity to indicate that they align with the values of Medicare for all, universal single-payer health care, and a Green New Deal to treat climate emergency like it's an emergency, and many of the other things that I've talked about tonight, without fear that Susan Collins, the incumbent, will be reelected, because they're not splitting the vote for the Democrat. In fact, we have encouraged our supporters to consider vote blue number 2, because we also would like to see the incumbent retired, and the best bet after ranking me first to do that would be to give the Democrat the second ranking.
Next question we have here from Ferret with a Hat again. Ferret with a Hat says that they feel they've been let down by the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, and they want to know, if you put into words, why. And again, I know this is a little frustrating because I know you're running independent, but they asked, why should they support the Green Party instead of mainstream parties?
Oh, so many reasons. The primary reason I still share, even though I'm now an independent and I'm not enrolled in the party right now, and that is that as a Green Party candidate, I swore to neither accept nor solicit donations from corporate lobbyists, corporate executives, the super PACs that launder corporate money so that people can take it and claim they're not taking it. And the reason that the Democrats and the Republicans disappoint the people time and time again is they take money from the same corporate sources. The same big pharma and the same banks and credit card companies and big oil and all those, they give money to both those parties because they're hedging their bets. So when someone is elected to go to Congress, they're representing the corporations that funded them rather than their constituents. I'm the only non-millionaire in this race, and I have no experience taking money from corporate lobbyists and then letting them write legislation that I then introduce to, benefit their wealthy benefactors. I'm going to the Congress to represent the people. And, I don't know all Green Party candidates, obviously, but the ones I've met and campaigned with, Howie Hawkins came to Maine last week, and we were out on the stump together. I know Jill Stein. I've been at campaign events for her and voted for her twice. Ken Mejia, Madeline Hoffman. There are so many great Green candidates, and the thing that we all share in common is we don't take money from corporations, and we're not going to represent corporate interests. So the Green Party of the U.S. has a set of 10 core values that you can look at. And back when I was a disappointed Democrat, realizing, the minute President Obama got nominated, he voted for the war supplemental bill that year, because they used to fund the wars separately from the Pentagon base budget. And he voted to give the big telecoms immunity for spying on all of us. Like his first week back in the Senate after receiving the nomination, that was the end of me in the Democratic Party. And when I began looking, my husband had been a Green for many years and been blamed as a spoiler. I joke around and say he's been blamed for every Republican administration since Ronald Reagan. But he and others, and I have now studied it, and I agree with this, that's BS. It's the non-voters in the US that result in us getting bad presidents and bad governors. And it's the people who don't vote. And then exit polls show that many people, when polled as they leave after having voted for Jill Stein, will say, well, I came out to vote for Jill Stein. I wouldn't have voted for the corporate Democrat. So it increases voter turnout. And under ranked choice voting and the pandemic, which we've had, we have no fault absentee voting in Maine already. And we can also vote early in person just by going to our town clerk. Something like more than a third of people have already voted in this election this time, and they're predicting voter turnout nationwide is going to be amazing because we've made it easier to vote. It's almost like, wow, making it easier to vote would be good because it would increase voter turnout. I'm not sure that's to the benefit of the two corporate parties, but I'm sure it will be to the benefit of third parties and independents.
All right, next question I have here is from McDogg, who watched the recent 4A debate you had, and in his words, quote, Max Lynn was something. McDogg wants to know, what are your thoughts on how that debate went?
Well, I need to know exactly which debate he means because we've had 4 so far. And the last 2 debates, Max Lynn has been pretty subdued and has acted more like a serious candidate. In the first debate, he refused to answer the questions, and he made a lot of grandiose claims about some websites that he had. And when the newspaper reporter, who was one of the moderators, said, I would ask you to stick to the question, he said, request denied. And then he used that line again later. So he got a lot of press attention from it because it was theatrical and entertaining. And then in the second debate, he addressed the mandatory mask wearing question by taking scissors and cutting up some paper masks a couple times, making a big mess on the floor in front of his podium. So, and he also really attacked the 2 corporate party candidates a lot in that debate. So I'm not sure which one McDogg is referring to. When people saw the first debate, which was on September 11th, and you can see all these debates recorded if you're interested. My website is lisaformaine.org. And when you go and look along the drop-down menus, there's one under media that says debate. and it has links to all the recordings. 2 of the debates have been on C-SPAN, and the third one also is available on the internet as a recording. But after the first debate, people were like, oh my gosh, how did you keep your cool? Weren't you distracted by Max doing that? I was like, I taught school for 25 years, and most of that time I taught teenagers. Do you think I've ever had Max Lynn in my class before? I'm pretty good at, if I perceive that your behavior is solely intended to disrupt the proceedings, I'm pretty good at ignoring it. And really kind of, he made me laugh. I think he's a nice guy, actually, and certainly has been friendly to me. Right now, we're cooperating with Max Lynn. We filed a complaint with the Federal Elections Commission because the next debate is tomorrow night, and we were not invited to it. Only the Republican and Democrat were invited to it. It's a TV station here in Maine that's owned by the Hearst Corporation, and I believe it is corporate orders telling them to leave us out. I don't believe they want to leave us out, but Max lawyered up, and we both signed on to a complaint, because if we were excluded from that debate solely on the basis of party affiliation, then that is illegal, because that is considered an in-kind donation to the campaigns of the Democrat and Republican. And corporations aren't allowed to make donations to candidates directly like that. And the fines are pretty hefty. Now, will the FEC act or act in time to get us into the debate? Remains to be seen. But Max Lynn is an interesting fellow. I think he's sincere in his beliefs. Some of his platform some of his views are kind of populist, but he's a big President Trump supporter, and for the most part is to the right of Susan Collins on most things, I think.
I do remember hearing, seeing in articles, request denied. That was kind of funny. But you just mentioned there about, how you guys are working together on a lawsuit over this, considering it a corporate donation. Is that right?
It's not exactly a lawsuit. What we did was file a complaint with the FEC, asking them to step in, because we allege that this is an illegal campaign contribution, and that the FEC should, stop it from happening. We'll see what happens. Will there be a lawsuit if we are, in fact? I'm still hopeful. People make bad decisions, and then they get new information and they change their minds. Just today, I delivered 2,500 signatures on an online petition on my website saying, let Lisa debate. I went down to the TV station and handed them a printout of these, 80 pages of signatures. And I'm hopeful that they are going to communicate with their corporate leadership and say, really, is this worth the risk? I don't know how true this is, but the lawyer that was advising us said that the FEC can fine a corporation that makes an illegal donation like twice the amount of the value of that donation. Well, an hour of primetime TV is pretty bad. That's a pretty high value. So I would think that they would want to avoid the risk of such a fine. And under ranked choice voting, it's doing a disservice to voters to not let them hear from all the candidates that are on the ballot. When they go to vote, why would they only have heard from 2 of the candidates and not the other 2? So.
Right. Now, Maine has a long history of independence. Of course, most of us are familiar with Angus King, and it strikes a lot of people odd that, you did mention you're running as an independent, and I've heard from a lot of people in the Green Party, we're really excited for there's a Green who can win because of this ranked choice. Do you have any thoughts on Maine's independence streak and what that means?
Sure. I think that because Maine is chronically, depressed economically, and it's not an easy place to earn a living for most people. And people are just different in Maine. When you live elsewhere and you come back to Maine, you realize people are just kinder. They're more helpful to each other. They're much less likely to get in each other's business. I think that's just kind of a Northern New England thing. It's kind of a live and let live philosophy, but they work hard, they take care of their families, and they help their neighbors. if my car goes off the road on icy conditions and ends up in the snowbank, the first person that comes along is going to stop, and they will stay and help you until you are out of the ditch. And that's happened, to me more than once in Maine. It's, when you get back to Maine and you go through the toll booth driver makes eye contact and speaks to you and says thank you as they take your money. It's just that kind of a place. We do have, a tradition of independence. I'll tell you a funny story about Angus King is our current senator, our other senator, and he is an independent. He was reelected in 2018 with a majority. He was our governor for 2 terms as an independent. But when he was running for reelection for Senate last time in 2018, there's a polling, a lot of the polls have left us out too. They haven't asked about me and Max. Some have, but many of them haven't. They didn't ask, one of the polls did not ask about Angus King in his own reelection bid because he didn't have D or R after his name. So they overlooked him because he had I after his name. So I think that's pretty funny. Susan Collins for years basically ran on, I am an independent senator. I may have R after my name, but I don't do everything the Republicans tell me to do. And that used to be true. The senator that Susan Collins really considered a mentor and someone that I also, as a shero of mine, was Margaret Chase Smith. She was a Republican senator in the 50s, and she'd been in the House already, and she was elected to the Senate. And as a freshman senator, she stood up to Joe McCarthy, the red baiting senator who was accusing people of being communists and ruining careers and terrorizing the Senate. And she got there, and no one else had the courage to stand up to him because they didn't want him to wreck their career. And she gave this speech that was called the Declaration of Conscience speech, where she essentially said, I'm from Maine. We don't like bullies. Go ahead, try and bully me. Call me a communist. I don't care. It seems to me that the people that are shouting the loudest about Americanism have forgotten that one of the basic precepts of Americanism is the right to hold unpopular opinions. So I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but she galvanized all these senators rushed over and congratulated her. And I think that is kind of an ethos of Maine, like, don't threaten me, don't bully me. I have values about my family, and Maine is a beautiful place. We like it like this. That's why everyone's against the CMP corridor. We don't want to be cutting down the trees and wrecking the trout streams. And, there's a reason why it's called vacation land, and because people love to come here and enjoy the natural beauty, but it's, we don't have a lot of big fancy shopping malls. We don't have Rodeo Drive or, Fifth Avenue. It's just a kind of different culture up here.
So I personally have seen a lot of articles about a partisan divide that apparently the partisan divide is the largest it's been in over a century, and people are real bitter. Do you think any of your 3 opponents, are in any way bad people, or are these really just policy differences?
Well, I don't think any of them are bad people. I know they're all millionaires from their FEC filings, so I don't think they can understand the needs of working class people and what we're struggling with. But I also think that in the case of Democrats and Republicans, they take money from the same corporations. So the more the Democrats and Republicans take money from the exact same corporations, the more they have ginned up this whole, oh, we're so different from each other. The negative advertising campaign that both of my corporate party opponents have spent tens of millions of dollars all summer long and all fall, attacking each other, calling each other liars, printing ugly pictures of each other. It's on the TV constantly. When I was at a farmer's market this summer, a 12-year-old said, I can't even watch my YouTube videos without seeing those stupid ads. I just want to watch my vids. I even had to learn a new word, he said. I said, what was the new word you had to learn? He said, hypocrisy. So the glut of negative advertising, I would argue, has been bad for children. Children don't need to think that's what political discourse looks and sounds like. And a couple of people who have weighed in on the debate tomorrow that we're being excluded from have said, I'm not tuning in to watch those two snipe at each other. I've already watched way more of that than I wanted to watch. And but do I think they're bad people? No, I'm sure they're not bad people. I think that money clouds their judgment.
Uh, Next question we have here is from a user outside of Maine. Sushi asks, "What can I do to support a third-party and independent candidate? Third-party and independent candidates in a battleground state that only offers two options?"
Well, you could still donate to their campaigns and volunteer for their campaigns and help educate your fellow voters to understand, what's really at stake. I'm not going to tell people how to vote. If you feel that you need to vote for the lesser of two evils and hold your nose until it bleeds to do that, it's a secret ballot for a reason. We all have our conscience to answer to. We do the best we can to decide what the right thing is. But I think that information control is at the heart of this false dichotomy and this corporate government problem. So anything you can do to, shine some light into darkness, share some truth, share some real information, and yourself find real information and share it with others. I think that's a really important civic duty right now in the times we're in.
And the next question we have is from Burke. Burke wants to know, of course, the Senate has a big hand in foreign policy, especially with ratifying treaties. If you're elected senator, what will your foreign policy be?
Well, my foreign policy would be to close the 800 military bases that exist all over the planet, particularly AFRICOM. People in America know very little about, but we have been expanding our military into the continent of Africa rapidly in the last couple of decades. I think that I would stop building nuclear weapons. I would stop building weapon systems and engage in diplomacy and international cooperation. If the climate crisis did not sufficiently demonstrate that the planet is basically one village, and that if we do not come together and use our, best thinking to solve the climate emergency that's already underway, then it's probably going to be game over for humans and many other life forms. Then along comes the pandemic. Okay, now we have a global pandemic with a virus that's highly contagious and no one really knows what to do about it. That there too, the US has stood alone in saying things like, no, we're not going to work with the World Health Organization on their vaccine. Or we don't want their test. We'll make our own tests. Or our, corporations, for-profit corporations will make the vaccine. That is foolhardy. We should be cooperating fully with all governments on the planet, because these two existential threats are real. And, our foreign policy has largely rested on that we had the biggest military. And so we've applied that solution to every problem that we've perceived. World War II just ushered in the Cold War, and America's been at war almost every year since, and we drop a bomb on some children somewhere every 20 minutes or so, and Lockheed's coffers go ka-ching every time we do it. So I don't think that foreign policy means military force. I think that foreign policy should mean being clear about our values, cooperating with other countries, and working together on the things that we absolutely need to do to survive as humans.
All right, and last question we have of the night. Are there any policy priorities that you'd like to discuss that we haven't touched on yet?
Let's see, I didn't talk about Medicare for All very much. Some of your questioners appear to live in countries where you have universal health care, so hooray for you. I lived in Japan for 4 years back in the 80s and experienced universal health care there, even though I wasn't a Japanese citizen. It was pretty amazing. But we are long overdue. Most countries got universal health care after World War II. The profit in our health care is a dismal failure. It should never have gotten in there in the first place. And it's the reason why we pay, the US per capita outlay for healthcare is, for just from the government, from the public outlay of healthcare is equal per capita to the next highest country, which is Switzerland. Then on top of that, Americans reach into their pocket and pay another huge amount for healthcare. Then our healthcare outcomes are worse than most developed countries. Most of the wealthy countries have far better, just basic metrics like life expectancy is going up, not down, maternal mortality, infant mortality. So I don't think profit and healthcare even belong in the same sentence together. I favor Medicare for all as the solution. It should be an improved program of Medicare for all, by which I mean currently Medicare doesn't cover some pretty important things like mental health, dental, vision, hearing. So it should cover everything. No more body parts medicine. It's, the whole deal. But also Medicare for all is essentially an insurance scheme. It just isn't a profit insurance scheme where the federal government would become the single payer. And that would give the government huge bargaining chip to negotiate with pharmaceutical companies like other countries do, and to set the price for procedures. People in other countries cannot believe how much Americans pay for just something basic like an appendectomy. But the estimates range between 15 and 30% of the cost, the price tag of American healthcare is profits for insurance company executives. Most health insurance company CEOs make $20 million a year, and there are lots of them. So if you get that profit out of the system and simply have, every doctor in the country already has a Medicare number, and most recipients already have a Social Security number, you could institute this plan pretty quickly, and it would be quite different from, for instance, building a national health service such as Canada or England have. Should we ultimately do that? Maybe, but I think here in a public health crisis, we really need, a robust public health, national public health system, and I think Medicare for all is the fastest way to get there.
All right. So once again, for anyone listening, the website is Lisa for Maine, FOR, lisaformaine.org. Lisa, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Great questions, you guys.
All right. Thank you. You take care.
Yep. You too. Be well.